Hey, fucker. I wanted to jump in and do something that I have not done in quite a while around this community, which is to speak to trauma broadly from a less advanced perspective, I guess. Not to toot my own horn, but I've been working on this trauma thing for quite a while now. And I think throughout all of that self work, it's kind of slipped my mind to continue talking about the very basics of it, which I think all of us really need to hear. Not only the newbies who are just finding out about CPTSD or who have suspected that they had a bad childhood and it impacted them, but even also those of us who have really been working at it for a long time. There are some really useful points that I think are beneficial to be reminded of, especially if you've been going through a re-traumatization or a highly triggering time. It is in some ways like starting back at the beginning, especially in the way that you are dealing with yourself, as in not beating the shit out of yourself. So let's go ahead and do more of a broad discussion of the things that you really need to know, the basics of recovery that if I was going to give advice to anybody, this is what I would want them to hear and to start to comprehend and to reprocess and think about. Okay, here we go. So first of all, you are not your thoughts. You are also not your stupid fucking brain. And both of them actually kind of lie to you a lot. Your thoughts are often remnants of other people's thoughts, or they are ideas that your brain has soaked up from very extreme circumstances that you were in. And to continue trusting your thoughts completely without rethinking your thoughts is going to keep producing the same results, the same patterns, the same endless loops as you have already experienced in your life. And spoilers, also your life will turn out a lot like the people around you, whether we're talking about your family of origin or more broadly their families of origin, or the fucked up, traumatized town that you grew up in, or the addicts that you surround yourself with. You know, the conditions of the people around you teach your brain who to be and how to be. So it's really in everyone's best interest to challenge your thoughts regularly. On top of that, I like to separately point out that you're not your stupid fucking brain. Your brain is amazing. Humans are full of potential and just really, really, truly impressive abilities cognitively. But they're also very capable of a lot of stupid bullshit. And that's not only thought-based, but also in our immediate animalistic reactions that happen in the lower levels of the brain, right? So it helps to remember that you are not your triggers. You are not your memories. You are not your judgments or the judgments of other people that implicitly flood your subconscious on the regular. That's your brain. You are something else. In my belief system, you exist more down here in the chest and in the guts. And that is where the true human energy resides. It's funneled through the brain, and that's where everything gets fucked up. Because the brain absorbs everything from our experiences and environments, whether they're good for us or not. whether they are true to us or not. So it's just something to be mindful of. You are not your depression. You are not your anxiety. You are not your trauma. You are not your brain. But you can learn to work with it in a much more useful and beneficial way that allows you to live a lot more consciously and authentically. And that's what we really aim to do here. That is the point of all of these discussions. So, number 2, you can and you must choose your own cognitive adventure all day, every day, every minute of every day. Unfortunately, if you kind of let go of that mentality in the first mentioned point, we have a bad habit of falling back into our most automatic, comfortable, well-worn patterns. And that is where we run into trouble, and we just start behaving in line with the ways that other people forced us to in the past, or that circumstance forced us to in the past. So if you're not really mindful every moment that you are awake, you will end up slipping up, which is okay, as long as you then reflect on what has gone wrong and make amendments at that point. You know? The good news is it gets a lot easier as you go through recovery, as you start monitoring your brain regularly. You will find that you don't have to do it as intensively. It's a lot simpler, and you can do it a lot faster. There's less strain. You can pivot much easier. You can notice your own unhealthy patterns or when you slip up with greater ease. And it's not such a shocking experience anymore. It's just a minute change to get back on track. In recovery, you will get off track. The healing is in returning to the practice. And you will get a lot better at it with time. I promise you that. If you don't do this, if you aren't rethinking your thoughts and monitoring your automatic reactions to things, unfortunately, the result is you end up with a life that reflects the ways that you were trained. I hate to use that word, but that is honestly what happens to us in life running these brains. You will not end up with a life that is true to you or reflective of you or even beneficial to you. It will not even be fulfilling to you, which is where also, trigger warning, the suicidality comes in hand with complex trauma. If you are not watching yourself, you will fall back into old patterns that probably belong to people who honestly were rather difficult and harmful to be around because they were living their own miserable, inauthentic lives. And the same things tend to take place, especially as we age, right? The old cliche that we become like our parents with age. It is true. So in order to offset that, you're just going to have to learn to be a lot more careful about believing the first thing that pops into your head. And you'll find that life gets so much better as you start practicing that, as you start making more authentic and aligned decisions. Things automatically shift. They shift very quickly at times. One change kind of catalyzes the next change. And truly, you have no idea what is possible for you until you get started. And as you stick with it through the ups and downs, it will get better. It will feel better to be alive in general and in every moment. Okay. Number 3, what you need to know is this training that I mentioned. I know it's a hard word to hear because it makes us sound like we are dogs. But the truth is, our brains work the same way as dogs for the most part. So this training, it really is that. That comes from a lot of sources that you will eventually be investigating. Right now, you probably have one source of trauma that's really sharply in your mind that you want to look into, or you're aware that it has impacted you somehow. It might be an acute trauma. It might be a recent relational trauma, like a bad romantic partnership. It might be a work relationship, a relationship to your work that you realize has been filtered through trauma, or it might be your family of origin. But also, you're going to want to pay attention to these things. Generational trauma or intergenerational trauma, the trauma that has come from the people who came before you, the narratives that have been passed down through your family, the ways of living, the ways of surviving, and the abuses enacted on one another. They go from generation to generation. It is helpful to learn about your grandparents and great-grandparents and what they went through, because you're going to want to learn about what we call the family system with time. Your parents came out the way they did for a lot of good reasons. Probably terrible things that happened to them, but there is reason for the way that they think and behave and have emotions, or absolutely do not have emotions, because they don't know how to, because their parents never taught them, because their generations were not encouraged to. You see, generational trauma. You'll end up investigating it. Next one, your parental maturity. I think that's what we can really boil our parental neglect and abuse and reverse parentification down to. It's their maturity and their general mastery of life skills, or lack thereof. Most of us, as we progress through this journey, realize that our parents have no emotional intelligence whatsoever. They have been coping poorly with their own internal environments for their entire lifetimes. And that has really shaped everything about them, which then, unfortunately, trained us to behave in ways that would not get us beaten or abandoned by them in pretty extreme manners. So you'll eventually come to learn that your parents probably also don't know how to live a balanced life, or the way that they numb themselves or distract themselves or cope with negative events is very self-sabotagey, or it had really terrible downstream results for them or everyone around them. You might realize that they are not actually very wise or very good at picking up lessons from their life experiences. All of these things matter, because really our brains are modeled after their brains, unfortunately. And so it can kind of help to take a look at them and realize that a lot of what you're seeing is probably also going to be true for you. I'm sorry to reveal that truth. Alternatively, what you see in them might explain why you act extremely in the opposite direction from them, because you try to avoid being like them, and instead you're living on the same axis, the same pole, but you are doing everything in your power not to emanate them, which can also be just as unhealthy, right? All right. Next thing that trains us in ways that keep us from being our authentic selves or living happily. Broad society. We're talking like on a global scale, this century, this decade that we're in. and all of the decades that you have been alive that have come before us, and also the global decades that your family experienced. It helps to understand the patterns that all of human society have been going through, because that explains, again, a lot of the behaviors that people picked up and passed on to us, or in the present day that we are adapting to, and why we act the ways we act. For instance, technology these days, it permits everybody to live completely thoughtlessly and happily distracted from dealing with any of their real problems, or reflecting on the problems that they create, or the problems that they bestow on the people around them. They never have to feel shame. They never have to feel pain. Everyone can just stare at the internet instead. So, things like that. Helps to understand how we're all getting by as a species, and the ways that we did when we were younger as well. For instance, a friend of mine recently said, "Isn't it funny how millennials can't go to the grocery store and do a big shopping trip, or else they will binge eat all of their food? So we have to get food in like micro trips to the grocery store in order to manage ourselves." And I said, yeah, that, or we were trained from a young age that food was a reward and therefore a positive emotional event through pizza parties and candy and snacky offerings from our parents. And that's why now, as adults, when we don't have those parental figures managing our food, we don't know how to do it for ourselves, because that food signals, "Good job, self. You did a thing," when very rarely are we deserving of that personal pizza party we're throwing, you know? Now, okay, that's number 3. Broad society, you'll realize, has trained you, has made a huge impact on the ways that you get by each day, the ways you think, the ways you know how to feel, and so on. Number 4, your more narrow grouping within society. For instance, your socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, the religion you were brought up in, your gender, your sexuality, the neighborhood that you grew up in, the kind of microcosm that you were in. Was it rural? Was it urban? Were you raised affluently, but by people who used money to manipulate you? Or were you raised in poverty? Maybe also with people who use money to manipulate you. All of these things, these various groups that we're in, or more fine-tuned social surroundings, the subgroups that we are a part of within the broader global community, these also, again, train us to become the people that we become. Do I need to pull out Catholicism and shame, or folks who grew up in like culty religious settings who now are extremely opposed to anything spiritual whatsoever? There's a million examples of the ways that we are trained to behave through these other statuses or labels that are put on us. We can also speak to gender. Women often end up falling into the learned helplessness patterns in life. Men take on that more aggressive, I'm going to push my way through tendency with their behaviors. You'll start seeing it everywhere if you start studying and reflecting on where you came from, especially the more you meet people who did not come from the same circumstances or do not have the same group identities. I really only started learning about complex trauma and poverty trauma and the like via entering into academia and being surrounded by people who came from differently dysfunctional families or actually supportive families that made me stop and go, oh yeah, I'm patterned different than you. I wake up in terror every day. And feel like I don't deserve the right to breathe or eat because somehow it all costs money. Check those things out. So we have generational trauma. We have your parental maturity / degree of life skill mastery. We have broad kind of global society throughout the time periods that we have been alive and the people who raised us have been alive. And we have our more narrow groupings or micro communities that we have been involved in. The more specific social surroundings that we've been a part of and how we've adapted to all of those things or learned lessons from all of those things. And lastly, number 5, your actual life experience and life learned lessons. I would say that actually might be the oftentimes least significant of all of the things that were just listed. We are so programmed by everyone and everything else that we will override our own life experiences, our own emotions, our own memories, our own perspectives. And instead, we will adhere to what we are being told and shown by our surroundings or the people in our surroundings. So it actually is an effort for us to stop, notice, recognize, process, and integrate our own experiences from the inside and out, and to put them into a cohesive timeline, which we call your autobiographical recall or autobiographical self with a small s. It takes effort, it takes attention, and you actually have to try to do it because the human instinct is just to keep moving forward. If something doesn't fit, we just try to forget that it was ever there in the first place. So oftentimes we have these narratives we're carrying picked up from everybody else, and something will happen to us in our lives, and we just don't even want to think about it. And we will just keep trying to march forward rather than processing it or integrating it into our life story. And that is what we call trauma, my friends. That's where the PTSDs come from. So that is where this training comes from, those 5 sources at a minimum. I think that's just the basics. You really have to make this strong effort to break away from all of those old training programs and patterns. And it will be difficult because most people don't. Like I just said, it's easier not to. The brain wants to keep moving forward. It takes energy. It takes biological resources to stop and rethink and reprocess things. And, you know, before the invent of fast, cheap nutrition, I wouldn't even say nutrition, food sources, it was hard to get to the energetic resources we needed to do that. So biologically, our brains evolutionarily would prefer not to spend too much time reflecting. We have other shit to do. At least in the past, they had a lot to be busy with. These days, we kind of artificially have a lot to be busy with. But that's a whole other story. The point is, the people around you probably are not going to be as participatory in recovery themselves as you hopefully are feeling yourself. And the more that you change, the more that you become closer to your authentic self, the more your social group is probably going to change. There will be most likely a loss of relationships, but also a blooming of new relationships as you become closer to your authentic self and figure out what's actually important to you in your relationship partners. So it's not all a loss. It will include some letting go, though, of relationships that weren't probably really even serving you in the first place. but that doesn't make it less painful. You know, we can't intellectualize our way through losing people who were important to us in one way or another. As you learn more, you'll probably find that they were important to you in kind of false ways, again, with the brain lying to you, having inaccurate ideas about what you needed in order to survive or to consider yourself an acceptable human. You will start self-validating and being more intrinsically motivated. And at that point, you will not need these particular social relationships to reinforce that you are okay. And then it does get easier to let them transition out or to let them change. You might not lose all of them, but the form that they take will probably shift. But that's honestly such a necessary part of this, because if you maintain these same relationships, generally that means you're maintaining the same behaviors, the same lifestyle, the same perspectives on things, the same thoughts, which point one, I told you, you're going to have to rethink your old thoughts. So with all of these things changing, your relationships need to also sway, or else they will rigidly hold you in place. If you're having the same social dynamics all the time, it will spark the same thoughts, the same emotions, the same shit-headed tendencies that people enabled you to enact with their own bad behaviors or with their unending abuse or their continual boundary crossing. You know, if you've had to cope to deal with some relationships that you've had in unhealthy ways, it's best to let go of those relationships and to develop new coping skills. And then maybe you can re-enter those relationships down the road. But be prepared that most folks are not as into rewiring their brains as we in the traumatized motherfuckers community are. And that's why we have the community here to support each other as we go through this, because it can be socially challenging. Just be ready for it. It doesn't mean you are wrong, although they will probably try to tell you that you are. We're here for it. You can vent it out anytime you need to. We're all used to hearing it. Not to say don't reflect on what they say, but also look at their lives and just make sure that there's evidence that you want to take their advice and their judgments without a grain of salt. All right, let's move on. Changing yourself thus requires, at a minimum, time, space, and energy. My favorite thing to say. You need time and space and energy in order to rewire your brain, in order to have feelings, in order to stitch your autobiographical narratives together, in order to do this self-monitoring and then behavioral change planning and then implementation and then reflecting on how all of that is gone. It takes time, space, and energy, because you need to be doing reflection, recontextualization, and reality testing. So reflection, different than rumination. Reflection is taking a neutral, critical thinking approach where you are observing things and questioning, is that really true? Am I certain that that's true? If this is true, then what else is true? And is there evidence for that? You need to be recontextualizing. You need to be gathering more evidence from your surroundings, from events that have taken place, and comparing your initial thoughts and reactions against broader circumstances for you, for others, across time and place. Recontextualize what you've been through also as you are possibly judging yourself in the past. Now that you are learning about trauma, about PTSD, depression, anxiety, abusive relationships, the patterns that have trained us from sources that we didn't know we were absorbing them from, how does that recontextualize what you've been through and the ways you've had to adapt? Knowing that your brain is just aiming for you to survive, and it will pull any trick that it can, but hopefully with the least amount of effort possible. How does that recontextualize behaviors that you've picked up, or viewpoints that you've held, or relationships that you've been in or unable to leave? Recontextualize it with a human perspective, with an evolutionary perspective, an adaptation perspective. Why does this behavior exist? There is always a reason. Every behavior has a function. So how can I look at what was going on around me to understand how this behavior came to be and how I then wound up here X number of years later? It's really useful. Reflection, recontextualization, and reality testing. That is where we take the lessons that we believe that we're relearning now that we really go back and pay attention to things. We take those lessons, we put them into action in reality, in physical, material reality, and we see if it's real or not. Alternatively, you can check your old thoughts and patterns and programs and see if those are actually real or not. Like if you have been afraid to leave the house because you believe that everyone is judging you negatively everywhere you go, leave the house today and see if somebody fucking heckles you. They probably won't. And you just tested reality and found out that a very self-limiting belief and probably a behavioral program that you've had a hard time shaking can get shook, fucker. It's not real, right? So all of this, we need time, space, and energy for reflection, recontextualization, and reality testing, can be summarized also into the fact that we need rest and reset. We need to stop being hypervigilant, to stop moving so quickly, to stop keeping ourselves busy and distracted, to stop believing that there's a certain number of hours each day that a person is meant to work or to devote to other people. You need rest. You need relaxation. You need to get off your own fucking ass. And you have to do this in order to do any of the aforementioned things. You will not heal by running yourself into the ground or trying to mechanize your recovery. Healing takes sitting the fuck down, laying down, not moving, being in your body, replenishing your body with energetic reserves that it may have been running out of for years if you've been running in fight and flight mode. You might have to learn how to rest and relax and reset. A lot of us are not good at it. We cannot cut off the internal drive that keeps us moving because it is our nervous system telling us that we're in danger if we ever stop. So it is really a learned skill for many of us. For the other half of us who are more parasympathetically driven into rest and digest mode, great. Make sure you're utilizing that time, not just disassociating into nothing. There is always a time and a place for disassociation. Don't get me wrong. It exists for a reason, just like everything else. But you can't just do it for years on end, pretending that reality doesn't exist. You will have to reassociate with the outside world and with being alive. And rest up before you do it. Turn off the Netflix so that you can get enough sleep so that you can let your subconscious spit what it needs to spit so that you take the lessons away, sew them into a cohesive story, and can move on. Don't just use your rest as time to still be distracted. That's not the point. So with all of this, you will be able to let go of old, not healthy relationships, including the ones with yourself, the ways that you brutalize yourself or sell yourself short or call yourself a burden every day. You can also re-examine and let go of your relationships with non-human entities, such as working. You will probably figure out that the line of work you're in and the actual work environment that you seem to always end up in, if you're always the scapegoat or if there's always an in tribe and an out group, if you somehow end up being abused through your workplace, you'll find out it's because your workplace relationship is mirroring other relationships that you've had before. Things like that. Your relationship to food, your relationship to substance abuse. You will figure out that you have relationships with everything around you and within you, and they all require re-examination and reworking. Sorry. This will also allow you to do emotional learning and having. Most of us have been instructed that we cannot have emotions. We're not allowed because it is inconvenient for others. / we have a clock to punch in and out of, and we don't want to waste company time with feelings. / robots don't have feelings, and in a lot of ways, our surroundings would prefer that we are just continually consistent robots for their comfort. So we learn not to have them. We learn that they are overwhelming and flooding, and we don't know how to deal with them because the people around us did not know how to deal with them and did not teach us. The truth is, you'll have a little emotion. What you need to do is to lean into it, to make it as big as you can, to feel where it is in your body and to quiet your brain so that you can take the lesson away from the emotion. Your subconscious will tell you what that emotion is about, and then you will actually take the lesson away and it will be integrated in your goddamn brain. So now you don't have to keep having these kind of ghosts of emotions forever. Once the emotion peaks and you figure out what it's about, it'll go away. You're done. The emotional roller coaster has ended and you are not dead. In fact, you've just remembered that you're alive and now you can better direct your life henceforth, having taken that information that your body has been trying to scream at you for years and actually utilizing it. Cool, huh? Yeah. So you need to stop moving. You need to do this reflection and you will actually start being able to have feelings again and use them. Use them to make important decisions. Use them to understand what is going on with you. Stop just relying on your goddamn brain. It's pretty fallible. You can get more information from the bottom up, as they say, the emotional center upwards, and then you combine that with the top down, the intellectual cognitive framework. And together, that's how we make good, aligned, healthy decisions and do not live with cognitive and emotional dissonance. Great. This is also time and space and energy where you will need to relearn your needs. You will need to learn what your needs actually are. Number one, as a human being, you can Google that right now. Nonviolent communication list of human needs. It's extensive. It is 10 times longer than the number of needs that I knew that I had. I thought I just needed food and water and technically enough sleep to sort of function, and then enough coffee to even out the ways I wasn't functioning. And if I was lucky, a roof over my head, but that's been redacted a lot of times in my life anyways. It turns out there's a lot more than that. That human needs are what I always consider rather lofty sounding based on what my experience in human culture and human systems has taught me. So check that out. You'll also need to learn what your particular needs are. As in, if you read the back of a box of whatever, pasta, it'll say that you need 2,000 calories a day. Do most of us really need 2,000 calories a day? Fuck no. Nope. Not at all. That's a crazy figure. I don't know where the fuck they get that. And therefore, everything else down below it is also not accurate. So if you start learning what your needs are in physical ways, in mental ways, in emotional and connective ways, that's a huge part of trauma recovery. Where, again, most of us with complex trauma were instructed that we could not have needs because that was a burden on other people. So we were taught to just disassociate and live in deprivation states instead. Now, as grown-ups, we're all having to learn, don't do that. Deprivation is not some kind of a fancy hat to wear and call yourself the fucking king. It's not a good thing. It makes you miserable. It makes you project things onto others. It makes it impossible for you to have any emotional awareness or understanding of your real motivations in life. And in general, it makes you a real pain in the dick to have to deal with, just to be blunt. You know people who won't name their needs. We all do. Think of my go-to is older women even older than I, like in their 60s is where I see this a lot in my own life, 60s and above. The rest of us too. I'm not just shit talking one group, but it's really prevalent there. They were taught that to be a woman correctly was to be the maternal nourishing figure to everyone around them, and they themselves need to shut the fuck up and have no complaints, right? So they will not tell you directly when they need anything, ever. And instead, they want to make you guess or live as victims because their needs are never met. Things like that. We don't want to do that. It really is a stinker for your relationships, and it makes you into an abusive human. Accidentally. You don't know you're doing it. They don't know they're doing it. But expecting people to be able to read your mind or that you can manipulate them into helping you, that's abusive. So you will also need to relearn what needs are and to ask for them directly. You will need to learn that you are able to just make requests for the things that you need in life. And that's really the easiest way that human relationships work. It smooths a lot of things out. Check out the nonviolent communication series at some point when you get a chance, if this is sounding unfamiliar so far. So you're going to do all of this. You're going to take your time, your space, your energy for reflection, recontextualization, and reality testing, which is going to require resting, relaxing, resetting, restoring your energy, resetting your nervous system. You're going to let go of relationships that do not serve you as you re-examine your relationship to those relationships. You are going to have to learn what emotions are and how to have them. You're going to have to learn about needs. And for the most part, this might be a controversial point, but most of us who really stick with recovering and becoming the people we want to become, we have some level of spiritual having and healing that goes on through the course of everything else. In fact, it kind of serves as the backbone that allows all of these other points that we've already discussed. Because shifting your perspective around a spiritual understanding rather than the brutal materialistic world that surrounds us allows us to reprogram everything, to rethink everything, to have just an enormous 180 shift around all of the things that we believed were real and mattered and were necessary so far. So to kind of have that openness and that ability to see things from so far outside of the box that we have been imprisoned in, there generally is a spiritual component. I know that makes people uncomfortable. If you had asked me 7 or 8 years ago, I would have said, fuck no, I'm out of here. Bitch, you lost me. No. My mind has changed a lot, as my mind has changed a lot. So I can't push you towards spirituality, but I will suggest that it will probably present itself to you. And don't turn away from it if you can be a little bit curious and open-minded, at least. That is where you will find a lot of the answers and a lot of the skills around having emotions and healthy relationships and really just a meaningful, purposeful life. And I'll leave it at that. Now, if I was going to boil all of this down to just 2 things that I think everyone needs to know as they are considering trauma recovery or learning about their trauma. Number 1, get off the fucking phone. Get off your phone. Put the screens away. Just stop it. I know you hate me. Again, slam the screen shut. You don't want to hear me. I get it. But truly, I think that mankind is regressing because of the extreme accessibility of things that distract us and the way that our brains are now patterned to continually consume outside stimulation, which stops us from ever actually reflecting at all on our own lives or our own internal stimulation, our emotions, our subconscious flitterings, our memories that we just try to avoid. All of those things are easily obfuscated without us even trying, without us knowing we're doing it, by having a goddamn phone in our hands. So break yourself of the phone habit as soon as you can, as thoroughly as you can. Don't get me wrong. There's times the phone is needed. Sometimes it is overwhelming to be in this motherfucking meat suit and you need to play 2 hours of Spider Solitaire. I've done it. Sometimes you don't want to turn on the news. I'm not suggesting that TV is a good option either, but you know, the front page of Reddit seems like a more comfortable place to be than the real knowledge of the world around you. I get it. Again, disassociation has its place in trauma recovery because oftentimes being in your body is like being on fire. And yeah, you're trying to escape it. You literally cannot tolerate it at times when there's a million individual traumatic things happening around you all at once. But as much as possible, watch your relationship with technology. I guess I can leave it there. I truly just don't think it is possible to recover and to be a chronic Instagram scroller. Like, it is kind of that black and white in my mind. Even if you are looking at mental health information on the TikTok or whatever your drink of choice is, it is not the same as doing the work yourself. Any of these above points that I've listed, it just isn't. comparable. And it is a way to be feeding your brain easy dopamine hits that feel like you're making good progress or change or making an impact on yourself. But you're not. Look at the people around you who are most obsessed with their phones, including their images on those phones. How are their lives going? Do you see things ever being resolved? Do they seem like they're very authentic human beings who are living their best life? Do they seem like they're just kind of zombies going through taking pictures to impress other people and generally not retaining anything that they supposedly are watching on the thing anyways? I don't know. Get off the phone as much as you can. If you have to use your phone for day-to-day things like we all do, rearrange the screens. Put the things that distract you and you use as escape tactics on the very last of the home screens. So you have like 3 scrolling motions to catch yourself trying to escape into those apps. There's a motherfucking Jess pointer for you. It works great for me every time. All right. And lastly, the final thing that I have to say that I think everyone needs to know is, fucker, you are going to have to heal yourself. Yes, go to therapy. Absolutely. Yes. Listen to the podcasts. Watch the expert videos on the topics that afflict you. The experts, not just anybody. Dig into the research papers if you like the approach that I take. Do those things. Find community support. All of that. Ask advice from people who you trust. But recognize that you're going to have to do this yourself. That even your therapist who you've been seeing for 5 years cannot tell you what the best decisions are for you. They cannot tell you what your real problems are. They cannot tell you what you have not told them, which you probably don't even acknowledge within yourself. So how are they ever going to be able to give you any good advice or education around the topic? They can't. You will have to heal yourself, and I recommend doing that through your self with a big S, which we talk about a lot on this show. It's, again, kind of dropping into your guts and into more of a spiritual center. And from there, you find information pops out of your subconscious that you can then just stitch together a lot more easily than you ever thought possible. And you realize what really has been afflicting you, how you really have been coping, how that coping really has been full of self-sabotage, and you've been replaying the same patterns and endless loops in your life, running in concentric circles around your family of origin that you just didn't notice before. You will have the best answers for you. You will know what is true for you and what is important for you in your recovery. No one else can do it for you. So, yeah, it's kind of a bummer because I think we humans, raised in a certain generation of a certain global culture, have really been sold the idea that help only comes from the outside, and it's something that we consume like everything else in our worlds, and that there is some overarching they who has the answers that we need. And if we could just get that one answer, everything would unfold in a nice, clean, Instagrammable fucking way. But that's not the case. And all of the self-healing that you do, which will be a lot of digging deep into yourself and finding your parts, as we call them, and having compassion for them, gag, I know, and reparenting them, ugh, I hate it too, I know. That is the real trauma healing and trauma recovery part of this whole journey. So it will be nonlinear. It will at times be messy. It will sometimes really not be something that you're super certain is going the way that you expected. There will be times that seem like you're having massive setbacks. There will be times that you worry that you're never going to come out of this again, or this is the depression that really sinks you, or this is the round of agoraphobia that you never come back from. But it's not the case as long as you keep trying. You will have times that you go back to old manners of coping and not your most functional behaviors, but there are times that that's what you need, or that is the equipment that you have. That's the tool that you know how to use. So you don't have to be thrilled about it, but also don't shame yourself into a deeper pit than you're already in, because we all go through it and we do all scrape our way back out again, probably faster than you really believe is possible. Because again, this work gets easier as you go. You're changing everything from your foundation up. So as you go, those rebuilds are more stable and more secure. And they can start amounting to just patching up a wall here or there rather than ripping out the entire basement and relaying it. Stick with it, fucker. Do not give up. It can be really fucking hard. You can be really judgy of yourself and embarrassed of the way that things are appearing to go for you. And again, if you are really worried about holding on to particular relationships that you've historically had in your life, that might make that more exaggerated than it needs to be. Just keep in mind that life is pretty long. It's a pretty long process. You've already been in it as long as you already have been. So assuming that it's going to continue, well, do you want it to be a repeat of what has already happened for as long as you have to be here? Or would you rather that things really massively shift in a way that is actually meaningful and authentic and fulfilling for you, and also improves life? I know this is cheesy, but for everyone that you come into contact with, you can be a positive force for someone who you even have a 30-second long interaction with, let alone the people who you are closest to on this Satan-forsaken planet. Really, no, it's more of a Christian God-forsaken planet. Satan's kind of rad. All right. That's it, fuckers. Those are the big points that I think everyone needs to know, period. Probably even those of us who do not have what we considered traumatized lives or brains. I think every human probably would benefit from re-examining the way they've been doing things and where all of those patterns have come from. So with that, I'm going to stop my preaching, climb down off this pulpit, and say, thank you for being here and wanting to do this work. Again, I know it doesn't sound fun, but actually it is. It's really fucking freeing, and it will give you back your desire to be alive. So stick with it. Thanks for jumping in. Thank you for supporting this project. It helps to get this message out to everybody else. It wouldn't be possible without you. And I hope that you stick around and do this work with us as long as it is feeling right for you from within you, yourself. All right. Hail yourself with a small s and yourself with a big S. Hail Archie and Marcus Barkus. And cheers, y'all. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.